Hello everybody, Michael Ryan is my name and I work as a school counsellor between primary and secondary schools. In this webinar we will be talking about supporting children and teens who worry and panic, and it is brought to you by the Government of Ireland in conjunction with Fingal Libraries and is funded through the Dormant Accounts Fund. And the general outline of this webinar will focus on some general slides about how we can support children who worry too much, some resources which might help the parent or guardian, and some slides to show young people at home or maybe in school on how they can manage their worries. So this is a list of the main worries that young people have. I'm not going to go down through each one individually, and you can pause if you need to, but you'll be familiar with exactly what kind of worries are most pertinent to the people in your lives. So let's look at some general tips and ideas for building resilience and how young people might deal with worry and anxieties. So when we look at this curve, we can see actually anxiety is not all bad. We need a certain amount for optimal performance. If we don't have enough, we're in too comfortable of a position, and if we have too much, we're too anxious. When we consider the first part of that curve, the child is working towards optimal performance, and we should congratulate them on their sensitivity because they're working hard to consider so many people. They're also in this decision-making process, and they have to take a lot of different things into consideration when before reaching that final decision. And they're also using their imagination quite well to deal with any of the anxieties that are arising as a result of that decision process. We probably need to focus on this part in relation to the webinar, because at this point the child is over anxious and productivity is very, very low as a result. When we consider anxiety and why it doesn't go away on its own, and we just take an example of the fear of dogs, and we will cover this later on in slides as well when we are showing children why anxiety is difficult. So the situation is the child is afraid of a dog. They think this dog is going to bite me, so they feel scared. And of course, our initial reaction is to avoid that fear. But the problem with the avoidance is, okay, they will feel safe because they're away from the dog, but the next time they see a dog, they will still be worrying, and we'll be back in the same situation over and over again. So naturally, our first reaction is to maybe accommodate the avoidance of that fear, because in ways it's easier. You probably think it's helpful. And you feel that you fear that the child will feel unsupported if you don't accommodate them. You might feel guilty or mean if you don't accommodate them to avoid the fear. And of course, for the parent or adult, it's hard to tolerate the child's anxiety or distress. And you fear that this will lead to some other more traumatic behavioral response. So we need to look at what's the problem with accommodating and avoiding those fears. So in general terms, it's associated with poor treatment outcomes for children and adults with anxiety. So it reduces the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the preferred therapy for phobias and fears. And so it reduces the effectiveness of CBT and any long-term outcomes we'd be hoping for. The accommodation of and avoidance conflicts with the goals of the CBT, so it prevents effective treatment. And it limits the opportunities for the child or young person to learn that feared consequences are unlikely to happen. Because very often, you know, there's a guy called Michel de Montaigne, and his favorite saying was, "My life has been filled by a whole series of catastrophes, most of which never happened." And that is the truth in relation to all of our fears. Most of them are unfounded. So it also reduces the young person's ability to adapt to change. So general exposure to fears or confronting fears is a better approach. So with kind of more general anxiety disorder, that's like exposure to your worry. So let's say a child is afraid of putting up their hand in class. So we can put measures in place to maybe ask the teacher to be patient with them, to encourage them to raise their hand in class. Or even at home, we could ask them to choose a movie to watch, or ask them to cold call a friend, or spend X amount of time on homework and see if they can bear that amount of time. For separation anxiety, it's a gradual exposure to time away from the parent or the safe place, and then reducing access to a phone to contact the parent so that they have to bear the pain of that for a short period of time. With agoraphobia, which is the fear of going outside, again, it's small steps, a short trip to a supermarket or a theatre, something like that. Social anxiety, again, it's small steps. So it's maybe getting somebody to call a business, or to stop somebody on the street and ask for the time, or to wear some clothing that might make them conspicuous, or ask them to come along and maybe help, not necessarily to do a presentation, but to help with a presentation. Maybe just to do the fire escapes, or to show people the fire escapes or something like that at the start. And then with selective mutism, again, it's about small steps. So you role play with them for some graded exposure, which could be doing something in class or in public. And you gradually work up to increasing social contact. Work with them in role play, again, about increasing voice volume, eye contact, or asking them a question. So we also need to look at ways to reduce dependency and build resilience. So empower the child, give them the opportunity to answer the question for themselves. What do you think? Maybe yeah, maybe no, I don't know. And let's test some of their solutions to the problems. We also need to give time. So it's best to insert a predetermined length of time before answering questions to increase their tolerance of uncertainty. So you might set aside a specific time to respond to worries. Say like Worry Wednesday or Talk Tuesday, or depending on the level of anxiety, it could even be every evening, maybe at 7 o'clock. But they need to learn to hold on to their worries until that time. Because we all need to be able to do that in the workplace. And so it's good to learn that skill when you're a young person. So let's look at some validating statements. And here we need to, if we work from level 1 up, say, so it's very important that you demonstrate to the child that you are present and that you're paying attention. And don't forget to use the verbal and the non-verbal ways of showing that you are paying attention. You need to reflect back and restate. So you might say, so you're mad because you feel I don't listen to you when you have important things to say. Am I understanding that correctly? And then they will see that you are actually paying attention and you do understand what the challenge is. So it's important to maybe to what we call read minds, so reflect what you see. I notice your leg has been shaking while you've been talking. You must be anxious. And this allows them, they'll initially look at their leg, they'll stop shaking it, but say, it's okay, it's fine. I just noticed that. So I'm just concerned that you might be anxious. Let's have a chat. With level 4, you communicate understanding. So you might say, it makes sense that you feel anxious because I'm asking you to challenge your worry thought. And that is really hard to do. With level 5, you acknowledge what is valid. You might say something like, I'm not surprised that you want to avoid going to school. Every day is a huge challenge for you to make it through, with all the anxiety you've been having about failing or fitting in socially. Most people would want to avoid something so difficult. And then show equality. Something like, when I'm asked to give a presentation at work, sometimes I dread the thought of doing it too. I worry about the possible outcomes also. So we should encourage facing and beating fears. So keep an eye out for opportunities to praise attempts to conquer fears and anxieties, and remember to monitor your verbal and non-verbal reactions. Discourage avoidance or denial, and reward any brave efforts. To provide affirmations and encouragements, you could say, you can do it. Don't worry if you fail the first time. Everyone fails sometimes. Your best efforts are good enough. Failing is not falling down. Failing is staying down. And try and encourage them to avoid any victim mode. So let's look at some other ways of helping the anxious child. Reassure them that they are loved and safe. Explain that worry and anxiety is just the brain's way of trying to figure out the world and what is safe and what is dangerous. The brain is just overcautious. Help them to see the logic and identify the source behind the fears. Tell them that they are brave to face these issues, even though they are nervous or anxious. Remind them that you are a team and that you will make sure that they stay safe. It's not all down to them. Don't treat them as confidants. So, minimal exposure to adult challenges around finances, relationships, family feuds, health issues, or job worries. So let's look at some other general guidelines to help children manage anxiety. Encourage the child to confront the fears, problem solve, and challenge their thinking. Don't try to remove the stressor or alleviate anxiety. Don't avoid the things that make your child anxious. Avoidance only makes the anxiety worse. Don't present an overly optimistic view of the world. It's possible that many of the things your child fears could happen, like failing tests, accidents, illnesses. Validate their fears in a way that isn't dismissive. Show that you understand their experience and help them to move forward to face their fears, problem solve, and challenge their thinking. Ensure you respond to their worries and anxieties in a calm and reassuring way. Have a plan in advance for big change that can happen to some kids, like returning to school, moving home, or moving school. And it's good to model healthy ways of managing your own anxiety. So when we look at this, parents or caregivers' anxiety, we need to acknowledge that anxiety in a household can be passed around to all members. Households should try and aim to be anxiety-free zones with similar habits being observed during extensions to the family, like in cars, or if you're out for meals, or out at events, or on holidays. You can model calmness, and when a child is anxious, your response will counterbalance their anxiety. Normalize their anxiety and reassure them that everyone has these. Then try and turn it into a strength to rebalance their unease. Another few general tips on helping the anxious child. Make bedtime a pleasant experience and a comfortable environment. Comfortable bedding, lighting, sounds, and smells. Create morning routines that allow for a nice pace to set up the day in a relaxed manner. Don't facilitate or foster comparison, competition, or one-upmanship in relation to friends, neighbours, siblings, or cousins. Try and help to facilitate friendship nurturing with the young people in your life. Maybe help them to join confidence building clubs like the Scouts or self-defense classes or performance, summer camps. All those kind of things help to build confidence and resilience. And have reward systems for facing fears and facing up to anxious situations. So limit the duration of exposure to anxious events. Keep it as short as possible, but stretch it out little by little each time. Let's look at some ways to foster resilience. So gentle persuasion of an avoidant child in a safe pursuit. Try not to over-reassure or over-scaffold the child. Praise attempts to overcome fears. Be clear about your expectations and what their expectations should be. So try to be realistic about taking into account their limitations. Model your ability to deal with disappointments, failures, or embarrassments. Model calculated risk-taking and talk the young person through your process on how you reached a decision. Try and model relaxation techniques. Avoid leading questions. So you might say, how did you feel about school today? Instead of, were you anxious in school today? Praise and reward acts of bravery among family members and express positive responses to brave events on TV. Offer a choice of two positive actions when faced with a problem and allow the child to choose which one to face. You could also redefine anxious feelings as exciting feelings. So let's look at some school-based interventions. Some young people don't like the big rush and push at the start of the day when everyone is trying to get in, so sometimes they accommodate late arrivals or even reduce timetables, so a shorter day to transition children with separation anxiety back to school. Usually a shortened timetable helps there. Then allowing extra time for transitions, so that's again giving plenty of notice around any transition that's happening from one year to the next or from primary school to secondary school, and just giving some additional time to some students to get used to those transitions. It's great if a school could have a safe place if a child develops increased anxiety or panic attacks. And again, they should be time limited, like 5 to 10 minutes, but at least they know they can have somewhere safe to go if they need to. And maybe having a plan, like that could include having a coping card in their journal with a list of different reminders about coping mechanisms, how to challenge thoughts, and reminding them of other times they have exposed themselves to problems and have overcome previous anxieties. When we look at the upper end of anxieties and we're in the area of diagnosable disorders, we're considering things like generalized anxiety disorder, separation anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, selective mutism, panic disorders, OCD or obsessive compulsive disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD as it is often referred to. When your child is at that stage, it is best to bring them to the GP, and the GP can decide on the best course of action to take in relation to treatment for your child. So let's look at panic attacks versus panic disorder. So a panic attack is a sudden discrete episode of intense fear, or maybe an intense desire to escape, or a sense of doom. It is the activation of the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, which puts us in the fight or flight or freeze mode. And the duration is around 15 to 30 minutes, and it's common in like 20 to 30% of young people. Panic disorder is when panic attacks are enduring, and so you'd have recurrent panic attacks, and you'd have inter-episode worry even in between panic attacks. And then you're worried about the implications and the consequences and how long this is going to go on for, and so it becomes an over-consuming process. It results in changes of behavior and is more common in adolescents than, say, younger children or adults. Basically, a panic is where your system sets off the fire alarm inside and dispatches all the firemen around your body to try and figure out what's going wrong, but they can't actually find the fire. The bells are ringing, the siren is sounding, but we don't really know for why. So what is a panic attack? It's sheer terror that everything is falling apart. It's an overload of real or a perceived threat to our safety. With the overload of fears comes an uncertain and unmanageable perception of outcomes. It's the dysregulated alarm in our system. It feels like the person is dying. They'll have a pumping heart, their chest may be tight, there'll be shallow breathing, they'll be shaking, they're terrified of the sounds and the sights, and they'll probably have a tummy ache. They feel detached from the world, probably crying uncontrollably. It's possible they may even soil themselves. And they really cannot focus on anything. So let's see what happens during a panic attack. Physically, they'll be sweating, palpitations, feeling faint, could be hot, could be cold. They'll have pain in their stomach, their heart, and their chests. They'll probably have headaches, the eyes will dilate, they'll probably get dizzy and start shaking. They could even be vomiting or choking, or they'll have shallow breathing, a sense of numbness and some tingling. So they'll have a sore or dry throat, sore limbs, tense muscles. And they'll probably have an urgent need to use the toilet. Psychologically, they have a sense that nothing is real, a derealization. They'll probably experience separation anxiety and will call out for somebody that they love. They may even experience depersonalization. They may not know who they are. There'll be a sense of feeling unsafe, feeling terrified, feeling out of control, feeling that they are going mad, possibly a fear of dying. They'll be quite upset, quite emotional, and fear of not knowing what to do or when this is going to end. And it's a mild form, and usually a short form, of depression. So let's look and see, why do panic attacks occur? So they may be preceded by a prolonged period of stress, like a long build-up of stress. Panic has the same reaction to a perceived fear as it has to a real or actual fear. The person is usually engaged in overactive negative thinking, always prepared for an attack. They may have social shyness, maybe introverts with inhibitions. Lots of perfectionist children experience more panic attacks. They have a fear of punishment, maybe a fear of failure. There could be a family history of anxiety or panic reactions. So it could be an environmental element that people pick up. Perhaps the child is overprotected, unable to make decisions or face new challenges or take calculated risks. There could be an underlying general anxiety disorder, which would require a trip to the GP. Perhaps they had previous trauma, a fear of that reoccurring, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then unstable foundations in a child's life and what we call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Things like abuse, sexual, physical, emotional, or psychological. And then sudden or shocking events like accidents, unexpected bereavements, a diagnosis of something, or a sense of being trapped. So let's look at ways in which we can help young people with panic attacks. So it's important for the adult to remain calm, use a low methodical tone, and look them in the eye. And then breathe. Use intentional conscious breathing. Demonstrate regulation using hands going in and out. So you could say breathe in and out. In and out. And those kind of visuals allow the child to regulate their own breathing. Reassure them that they are safe, that you're here to help them. Tell them that this is nearly over. Clear the area and get them to a quiet space. Get cold air to them, to the window, the door, or just get them outside. Give them some water. And if you're not their parent, let their parent or guardian know. So connect them with a comforter. So that could be a toy, maybe a blanket, or that reassure them that their parent is on their way. As they relax, get them to lie down or sit down and maybe cover them with a blanket. And they may need to cry, so let them cry it out, as they will have been frightened by the experience. And then stay with them until they get back into normal functioning. Make sure to check back with them later on to make sure they're okay. So let's look at panic disorders, and this is at the upper end, which would require a trip to the GP. It's when there's a persistent fear of the panic attacks, or when the panic attacks last for prolonged periods of time. And maybe there's no specific fearful trigger. These are harder to treat. It's what we call free-floating anxiety. These can start in childhood, but more frequently begin in adolescence. There's an increased risk of school refusal, of them engaging in risky behaviors, of developing depression or more serious psychological or psychiatric disorders. So these generally require some professional help, so you could seek a referral for cognitive behavioral therapy through your GP. So again, just looking at the upper end of regular anxiety, we're into the realm of generalized anxiety disorder, which also requires a GP to make a referral. And this is when the worry is excessive, or it's too difficult to control the worries, and they've been going on for at least 6 months. Generally, the kids are worried about the welfare or maybe the safety of family and friends, possibly even finances, their own relationships. Punctuality might be an issue, school performance might be an issue, or they could even be worried about general big world events. The associated symptoms are irritability, muscle tension, fatigue, unable to sit still, poor concentration, and poor sleep. They're not easily reassured. They could be throwing tantrums related to the anxiety, and poor concentration and attention. They could be fidgety. A lot of these symptoms would be similar to a child with ADHD. Let's look at some helpful mindful apps. So those ones there, Smiling Mind or Headspace for Kids, Mindfulness for Children, or Mindful Nats. They're all very useful. There's a couple of really good books, by the way, that you can get. So the one on the left is geared probably more towards the kind of 9+ age, and the one on the right-hand side is suitable for younger children. So in summary, anxiety disorders are the most common emotional behavioral problem in children and adolescents. The avoidance of the triggers to anxiety only maintains or worsens the fear or the anxiety. There's a high success rate of treating anxiety disorders using things like cognitive behavioral therapy with an emphasis on gradual exposure. So talking about the anxiety usually isn't enough. So in conjunction with that, they may require certain medications. That's really when it's at the upper end. But that'll be up to the GP to decide on that. So just remember that accommodating the fears or avoiding the fears by the family members or the school, although it's well intended, this maintains the anxiety as it interferes with the child learning that their feared outcomes are unlikely and that they can manage anxiety-producing situations. Here are some resources that might help. So if you're showing this presentation to young people, you can show the rest of this presentation from the next slide. How to beat your worries, also known as anxieties. So let's look and see how anxiety works and why it doesn't go away on its own. So in this situation, we'll say the boy has a fear of dogs. So in the first picture on the top there, we see he has a fear of dogs. So he has a thought, this dog is going to bite me. He feels scared. He runs away. So now he's at home and he's inside and he feels safe because he's away from the dog. But the next time he goes out, he's still worrying. The next time he sees the dog, he's still afraid of the dog. And so the situation just keeps going round and round and round. So what we actually need to do is face our fears in small ways. And what we're going to do over the next few slides is just to see how we can create an environment where we feel better about facing our fears. So the first thing we need to do is create relaxation habits in our homes and with our families. So that could be yoga or meditation or doing some exercises, either alone or with the rest of the family. So when we consider the worry, we have to use logic and detective work. So we've got to find evidence for the worry. If the evidence shows that the risk is small, then the amount of worry should be small too. When we consider the worry, we must also maybe consider really how worried should we be about this. Sometimes we're giving a level 9 out of 10 to a worry, but when we actually look at the evidence and we realize the risk is small, we need to bring down our level of worry to match the risk. So a small amount of risk, small amount of worry. A lot of people find it helpful to have something like a worry box or a worry jar, something that can contain the worry, or else the worry will be all around you, like oil would be if it didn't have a barrel to hold it in. So write out the worry and put it in the box. Then at a certain time, maybe every evening, or maybe just once or twice a week at the same time, so like 7 p.m. every day or once or twice a week, you will learn to hold on to your worries until that time. And then your parent or guardian will listen, help, and reassure you about that worry. You could talk to the worry bully. Let it know that you're in charge. In your mind even, just tell it to stop, leave me alone, remind it that you're in charge, go away, liar, whatever it is that works for you. Over on the right-hand side, there was one person and they've given me permission to use this example. So they used to think of the worry, they'd put it in a tutu in their mind. They would just put it in a tutu and watch it bounce away and dance away out of their lives. And that worked for them. So you might even want to come up with some creative way of getting the worry out of your mind. So this is about competing demands. So in this one, we talk about distracting yourself from your worry, because you can't be anxious and relaxed or simulated at the same time. So distract yourself from your worry, go and do something enjoyable or something nice or anything that's distracting. So another trick to deal with worries is when you're worried, instead of thinking about the worry, you can go to a safe place in your head. So think of an enjoyable event or a place that you feel safe and secure. So that could be visiting grandparents or some event that you've been at or a hobby that you like to do, anything that's enjoyable in your mind, and you can go there. So maybe create an art piece of that image so you can easily think of it when you are worried. Maybe a picture or a clay model, something like that. So the next thing is called diaphragmatic breathing. Big long word, it just means belly breathing. So put your two hands on your tummy and then breathe in and out, and just notice how your tummy rises and falls with each breath. That's really useful. It brings us out of our mind and it helps us focus on somewhere else in our bodies. Another useful way to deal with worries is to reset your system through exercise. You can either do this individually or together as a family. Good sleep is also very important for dealing with worries. So you should consider a number of things in around good sleep hygiene. So going to bed and waking up at the same time every day. Avoid caffeine consumption, which for younger people usually means avoiding soft drinks where possible. It's good to get some bright light during the day, but at nighttime your room should be dark, quiet, comfortable and cool. Try and have good quality mattress and pillow, nice and comfortable. Don't go to bed feeling hungry, but try not to have a heavy meal before going to bed. And then develop a relaxing routine before bedtime. So that might include bathing, listening to music, or reading. Reserve your bedroom for sleeping only, so keep the mobile phone or the computers, televisions, video games out of the bedroom. Regular exercise during the day will help you feel tired at nighttime, and it's best, if possible, to avoid pets in the bedroom. So let's do a little recap, like a summary on how to beat your worries. Use logic against your worries. Scale your worries and bring your worry down to match the risk. Lock them up in a worry box or jar. Make your worries wait for worry time. Tell them to get lost. You're in charge. Distract yourself from your worries. Move your body to reset your system. Use breathing exercises to regulate your body. Relax with a safe place to go in your mind. And get a good night's sleep. So thank you for listening to me today, and I hope you got something out of that, and good luck with beating your worries. So that's it from me, Michael Ryan. Thanks for tuning in, and good luck to you in dealing with worries and anxiety for the young people in your life. This webinar was brought to you by Fingal Libraries in conjunction with the Government of Ireland and funded through Dormant Accounts Fund.